All right, and I think we're ready for the first panel, and the first panel is on growing new farmers. And I thought, who better than Paul Greive, who was actually at our conference last year. And I guess last year he started his farm, Primal Pastures, and they started with 50 chicks in the backyard, and it's grown to over 1,200 pastured chickens and a herd of pasture-raised sheep as well. And Paul's also a student at Anderson. And I'll let Paul take it from here and introduce you to the panelists.
All right, thank you so much. I appreciate it. It's awesome to see everybody here. Super encouraging to see people turning out for something like this. Guys, I just wanted to start out first by maybe take a couple minutes and introduce each of you, maybe starting from down here on the end, if you guys want to start.
My name's Colin. This is my wife, Karen, and we're the founders of Archi's Acres, a small farm in San Diego. It services Whole Foods, our biggest client, several others, and it's also to the home of our Veteran Sustainable Agriculture Training Program, where we transition Marine sailors and everybody else, mostly on active duty, but many of them vets, into the food and fiber industry.
My name is David with the Evo Farm. We built the first commercial aquaponic farm in County, Los Angeles, and one of the few in the States a few years ago. We actually gave away the farm recently because it ran its course, and we've learned a lot from that system, and now we teach new methods. We build farms and schools. We consult on some of the largest projects throughout the state, and we also just about to launch a product line we call Nano Farms, which is the smallest balances aesthetic and function farm system available. Grows the most amount of food in the least amount of space.
My name is Thaddeus Barsotti with Farm Fresh 2.
I'm John Mesko. My wife Lisa is here with me today. We own and operate Lighthouse Farm. We produce predominantly grass-fed beef in east central Minnesota. And yes, we do have snow on the ground there. Just got a text from our daughter. I got about 3 inches last night. That's our second snow of the year, by the way. And I'm also the executive director of the Sustainable Farming Association. It's a nonprofit organization that, in a nutshell, we're looking for ways to develop an alternative infrastructure to the industrial conventional ag model, including developing and sustaining new farmers.
Very good. Thanks, guys. It's definitely an esteemed panel, and I'm honored to be a part of it. As Robert mentioned, I'm Paul Greive. Last year at this time, I was sitting in those seats, and I had a couple chicks in the backyard. Since then, it's kind of exploded. We consider ourselves grass farmers, and we're right out here in Temecula, so we're honored to be part of this. I want to start at first by floating a question out there to you guys, and I think probably target this one at you, John. There's sort of an elephant in the room in regards to farming in our country right now, and that elephant is average age of our farmers in this country has recently gone over 60 years old. And that number seems to go up by about 1 year every year, which is probably going to be a huge problem pretty soon. So what are we looking at here, and what are kind of some ideas on that concept?
Well, I think the average age of farmers has been a topic of conversation for the last 20 years. This is nothing new, but just like every other sector of our society, there's a lot of farmers that are baby boomers. And so they're aging just like everybody else is aging, and we're seeing that. I think that, and I speak predominantly from a Midwestern perspective. I assume that it's similar here. We have two distinct groups of people that we work with that are starting farming. Those are the 20-somethings that have lots of energy but very little money and very little capital, and increasingly do not have direct access to a farm from within the family. What has happened, and particularly in the Corn Belt, farmers that are 50 plus have not encouraged their children, in fact have discouraged their children from getting into agriculture because of the difficulty, because of the challenges, and because we increasingly live in a world where the lifestyle doesn't match what people really want to have. So we've got a lot of young people that want to get into farming, a lot of energy, they don't have any money, and they don't have any access to land or capital, or have limited access. And then we have increasingly early retirees, folks that maybe have had a career and have some connection. Maybe they grew up on a farm where they have a connection to land, but they're better off financially, but they don't have the energy of a 20-something. So one of the things that we're working in Minnesota to do is to match those two groups of people up where we can, so that we can have people working together. We're also looking for ways to find those farmers who either don't have children or have children that have no interest in continuing the farm, and match them with the younger crowd that has lots of energy and lots of interest and maybe wants to continue this farming operation in a more sustainable manner and less in a traditional corn soybeans. Again, in the Midwest, we're dominated by corn and soybeans. We do have CSAs, and yes, they do close for 6 months out of the year, but predominantly we're trying to convert conventionally operated or managed acres into sustainable managed acres. There's a number of ways we go about doing that, but I think that's kind of what our approach is.
Yeah, that's good. And Thaddeus, I know you kind of touched on this, but since you grew up on a farm and you didn't necessarily leave the farm, you came back to it at least. What do we do to encourage people to do that, to take that route?
Yeah, so I think the key factor in me coming back to the farm was that our mother passed away, and had she not, I probably wouldn't have come back. I briefly had an engineering job. There was a boss in an office, and I couldn't stay awake, and I thought, nah, I'm gonna go try and make this thing work on the farm. And when I talk with farmers that have younger kids, and they're not sure if they want to get involved, I think the biggest issue in just that group of like getting the existing farm kid to keep the farm is the farm kid goes out, gets an education, a spouse, comes back with these great new ideas and says, hey dad, hey mom, I want to do this. And they're like, no, that's not how we do it. And it really harms that energy. And so the thing that people who have farms need to realize is you need to give it up as soon as you can to the kids and let them make mistakes. Like, you got to give it to them. Like, here you go, Jimmy. I hope it doesn't kill you. And they're young enough to handle it. And that, there was I talked with the Minnesota farmer, and he's retired, moved down to San Diego, just bought 100 acres. He's like 50. He says, yeah, our family has a tradition of giving up the farm at a really young age. My dad gave it to me when I was 20. I'm giving it to my son when he was 20. And it has to be like that. It has to be like, here you go, it's yours, goodbye. That's for that group of people. But then there's this other group of people, like people who want to farm and don't even have access to that. And I think that's where is as exciting of a group of people, but it's more challenging. And that's where we need consumers and different types of distribution systems and financing and mentors, like, coupling young people with experienced people. That all needs to come together in a quite an organized manner to make that happen. But there's no shortage of people who want to be farms, and there's no shortage of people who want to buy product from those new farmers.
Good. Okay, so I wanted to run one by you, David, here real quick. I think anybody could probably touch on this, but what are some of the tools of the trade? I mean, what do we do to attract people into farming? What's the trick there? I know you're kind of hitting the streets now, so.
There's a lot of ways to approach it. We approach it from our nano farms from art, like, oh, by the way, it grows food, but this is a gorgeous fountain that happens to sound like a water feature, and so there's the aesthetics to it. LA happens to be a huge foodie community, so you can approach it from taste and textures that are maybe available more often than you might expect. You can extend seasons. You can certainly bring in varieties that are not available. As an urban farming advocate, you can bring in varieties that are not available in farmers markets or in stores. Did you know that does anybody know how many varieties of lettuces there are? I don't know the exact number, but I've grown at least 70 varieties. And about, most of those you've never seen them before. Silky textures, for example. As far as making attraction, though, I think it begins at an early age. So part of our work is to quite literally teach the future farmers of America through our Farms and Schools program. And we use it as not so much specifically to teach farming. Yes, oh, by the way, we're going to grow some food. But there's a lot more lessons that can be learned by teaching farming. And one of our great examples of that is at a school here in LA. We built a pretty sizable school educational system. It's about 1,000 square foot aquaponics system where we're teaching, it was called integrated environmental education. We teach many teachers, we did a first teacher training a few months ago, where whether you're teaching art, history, science, or math, there's a lesson to be learned on the farm. The school actually went and physically moved their business class in the garden area so they can study the economics of farming, and this is at a high school. So many different ways to approach it, from learning how to build it, how to operate it, maintain it, and some of the history and folklore and the backstory, what brought that farm to that school.
That's awesome stuff. I want to float the same question by you guys. And the issue is we don't just need bodies in agriculture. We need the top talent, really. We're losing so much of the top talent to, becoming great things like lawyers and doctors. But what's going to happen to our food supply? How do we get top talent back into agriculture?
Well, I'd say you got to provide opportunity, and I think that's something that's been lacking in the agricultural space for a long time, up until 10 plus years ago. We're seeing a balloon in agricultural land values, and we're seeing an increase in prices. And so I think first comes the opportunity. You got to know that you're going to be able to make money, and you're going to be able to provide a great lifestyle. I think my parents' generation, the idea of farming sounded great, but it's something they're going to do and retire because they didn't make a living before then. But I think the market space is such that it sounds great as a lifestyle, and now you can make money. You have guys like Jim Rogers saying, skip the MBAs, get ag degrees, because the investment bankers are going to be driving the tractors, and the farmers are going to be driving the Lamborghinis. And so, and I think a lot of that has to do with
Prius.
Yeah, a hybrid Lamborghini. I think a lot of that has to do with how we've kind of our agricultural policy in the United States, and we've kind of eliminated some of the free markets in commodities and so forth, and that's, I think, devalued land prices as well as commodity prices and made the farmers less profitable all in all, although I think the intent was to do the opposite. So I think it comes down to opportunity, and that's how you get talent in the space.
But I also want to say that 46% of our military comes from rural background, and we teach agribusiness on the base every week. And I can tell you there's so many people, young people, that are so excited to know that there's a viable career to be had in agriculture. And our program is open to civilians as well as the veterans and then active duty. But every day we're getting calls from the 20s and the 30s somethings that are very excited to come into agriculture. In our class today, we have 4 couples that are taking the class together. And they have land that they're going back to that the family was getting ready to just get rid of. And so I think the opportunity is wide for our military and for civilians to actually make a living. And just so you know, the military, we work with the Office of Secretary of Defense, who has just rolled out sustainable organic agriculture as a career track for all branches of the military. And that's brand new and very exciting.
That's really cool. I want to follow up on the military thing. I'm a former Marine. I'm a war veteran too, so I think that that's an awesome place that we can go to find new farmers. But what is it specifically about the military community? And then we'll talk about maybe where we can find in other communities where we can go. But what is it about the military community that really lends itself well to getting into agriculture?
Well, I think one, when you decide to leave the military, you're at a crossroads in your career. So you have to start over again. And so, when they're exposed to something like this, it's something they may consider. I don't think a lot of people find themselves in that position a lot. But I think a lot of the times, a friend of ours, General Osterman, when he came out and visited our farm, he said, hey, the reason I joined the Marine Corps Infantry is because I wanted to be outside. I wanted to spend a lifestyle outside, working with my hands, doing whatever the case may be. And, obviously, agriculture provides that kind of opportunity as well.
But I would also say that, as taxpayers, we invest over $1 million in every one person that deploys. And when they come back, to be able to transition those leadership skills that they take for granted, but to transition those into sustainable organic agriculture is awesome. And they take it on because it becomes that new challenge. And really the war at home is our food and water supply. So it's exciting to put those two demographics together.
For sure.
Can I add something to that? I think
Please.
that my perception of the military is that one, it's a lot of work, and that requires a lot of discipline. And those are 2 qualities that, to be a successful farmer, are absolutely essential. Speaking from the farmer's perspective, I would hope that we could find more people that can be as dedicated to willing to break their back, so to speak, because that's really what it's to take to feed the people.
Yeah, and it's kind of like for me, you don't join the military because you want to become rich. You don't join because you want to be driving that Lamborghini someday, but you want to make an impact. And I think that we're at a place now in agriculture in 2013 in the U.S. where being in agriculture is where you can have a huge impact, even without a lot of capital, without a lot of land. So, but what other communities can we go to? Where else are we going to find these new farmers to come out of other than the military?
Well, I would just say this, and maybe not a direct answer to your question, Paul, but just one thought about this is that we wouldn't have this conference if farming was as profitable as making iPhones is. Okay, so there's no conferences around how do we get more people to sell iPhones? Where are we going to find the new iPhone salesman, right? So I don't want to belabor this point. I think it's something that's we all kind of are aware of, that one of the main things that attracts people to farming is this opportunity to have an impact, this opportunity to do something noble, as was mentioned earlier. But at a base, we all need to be about figuring out a way to bring more money into the system. People need to pay for what it's worth, pay for the food for what it's worth. And at every opportunity, every one of us should be doing that. Again, I don't want to belabor that, but if farming can be seen as something that's attractive from that perspective, some of this is going to take care of itself. We started farming 7 years ago, and in the process, before then, I worked for Dow Chemical, and then saw the light of what my work there was doing, and we transitioned away from that, and I worked for the university, worked for Purdue University in Indiana for a number of years, and then we started farming, and in the process gave up a lot, gave up a good paying job, gave up a wonderful home. Our daughter, who was 10 years old at the time, was a fairly well accomplished piano player, and she gave up her piano lessons, and so now she plays at the same level she did when she was 10 years old. These are the kinds of things that we don't talk about. If farming can't supply the lifestyle to the children that are growing up on the farm, they won't come back. If it isn't attractive, for Thad, it was something that was attractive to him, and so there was this combination of, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Thad, but there was this combination of the need from your mom's passing, and then this whole idea that you enjoyed it, you must have, to come back to it. We have to provide that environment to be sustainable in our family farms. If we're going to have a new generation of people come in, it has to be something that they see as a path for their career. Right now, in an industrial ag model, we have a career progression. If you're familiar with how industrial Corn Belt agriculture is, or even out here, you can start out as a small farmer, you can start out as the child of a farmer, you can grow in the size and scope and scale of your farm, and then you can become a landowner, and you can become somebody who manages other people. There's a progression. In small scale sustainable agriculture, we don't have that. And one of the things that we're finding in some of our work at Sustainable Farming Association is that in about 3 to 5 years, when people start out, they either make adjustments to their plan to continue farming indefinitely, or they burn out and leave. And we're doing a study right now that is highlighting this. We're finding that people burn out in about 5 years, or between 5 and 10 years, because they're like, is this all there is? I've become a successful CSA producer, I've become a successful farmer, and is this all that's there? And so it's a real challenge to create this career path for sustainable agriculture, and that's one of the things we're trying to work on.
And from my point of view, the question is, where do we find these farmers? They're everywhere. I think the question's more of how do we empower these farmers to make a living for themselves, and retire and have vacation time, and be able to send their kids to college. And that's a more delicate question. And I think the other thing everyone should recognize is that we use the term farmer, what I think of quite loosely. So are we talking about vegetable farmers, which are like mechanics of jets, or are we talking about guys growing corn, which are like mechanics of bicycles, in the complexity? Not that what they're doing is not important, but just the complexity of the system, right? A corn system yields maybe $500 an acre gross, which is a lot of money for that corn, whereas a vegetable system's up in the $15,000 to $20,000 an acre gross. It's just a more complicated thing. Our organization participates in the Center for Land-Based Learning, has a farm academy, and they don't have a problem finding, 20, 40 people a year who want to explore the agriculture profession. The problem is, great, you find someone who wants to do it. What do? It's not like you can go and buy a farming franchise if you have $100,000. And let's just say you're really good at it and you can produce it and grow it and you get it in the box. Then what do you do with it, right? Like just what I said, it was hard. If you do that perfectly, it's not like it guarantees a sale. So what we need to work towards as a community is developing a larger demand for this style of production and being able to empower a system like CSAs or Farmingo or Good Eggs. There's lots of other organizations that do this, not just ours, to make it possible for these growers to do that. And then the other question, when we bring up the age of farmers, that I have to point out is, well, what defines a farmer? So someone comes out of Cal Poly and they're managing a harvest crew of 100 people. Is that a farmer? They're actually a farm manager for a large corporate farm. So they don't own the farm, but is that a farmer? Or they're a PCA. Like there's lots of careers for young, ambitious folks in the agriculture industry that don't count as farming. And then my last frustration with the academic portion of it is our universities encourage us to go and learn a very specific thing about farming and get a PhD in it. And I think that's harmful to the overall population, and we're not doing the next generation a service by encouraging them to do that. Another great step would be to see universities shift their mindset towards not just being specifically good at something, but figuring out how to have a farming system that's economically viable and realistic for this large group of people who want to be farmers.
There you go, UCLA, if anybody's listening. Let's be on the forefront of starting that sustainable ag program here. Maybe
Can I pick up on that?
Yeah.
As an urban farmer, sort of compared to a traditional in-ground farmer, I think you said upper value per acre is like 20, 25,000, something like that. When you think about the way we produce food, under glass, using energy efficient, water efficient methods, that we could do significantly higher than that. $1 million per acre. Could it be $2 million per acre? When you start, could it be even $4 million per acre? The answer is yes. The question, so all of a sudden, we take the same amount of space, you bring the food closer to home, the revenue model changes dramatically, and now you immediately have an opportunity to pay living wages. And so I look at, this is a really loaded question, like how are we going to attract future farmers? I mean, first of all, who are those? You're not talking about farmers. You're talking about farm labor, right? Because farm labor is really that's the loaded gun. And it's migratory. It's not here as often as it used to be, and there's a lot of different reasons why that's the case. And ultimately, it relies on people who are flying under the radar at best. And it's because there's a lot of work, and nobody works in 100 degrees sun throughout the year. But when you can change the climate where somebody literally is working, by working in a greenhouse where it's like 70 degrees, for example, it becomes more attractive. It's closer to home, and I think that's using technology and innovation. We answer that question over time.
I want to also say that we work with a lot of young farmers that are starting out, and we're certified organic hydroponic growers, and I want to say Farm Service Agency. That's where you get your funding. They have the micro loan, they have the operator's loan. And then after you've been farming for about 3 years, you can go on to borrow up to $1.25 million. And I'll tell you, we've used it for our farm. That's how we built out, and that's how our students are building out. And I can't say enough good things about it, and I see Val over there. But it's not just because he was sitting there. I didn't see him yet.
Yeah, and I know there's even
But
a whole
he's the
specific
way.
panel on funding the farm, too, I think, later this afternoon. So
We used
make
it
sure you stick
personally.
around.
It makes all the difference. Do you want to say anything on that?
FSA is great, but also say that's one of the things I love about Seedstock here at the School of Anderson and what they're doing, because like you were talking about earlier, you can go to an ag school and maybe not get any classes on what a balance sheet is or how to manage your top and bottom lines. A friend of ours who teaches financial classes within our program got his MBA and didn't do one class in risk management. So the education system about agriculture is very interesting. Farm owners typically do a little farming because they're in the back room managing HR, managing the books, and so forth. And the thing about it is, like the gentleman down here was talking about, he had to make sacrifices going to farming. His daughter gave piano lessons. He gave a good job. You're an entrepreneur. You're not just a farmer. You're an entrepreneur. You're going to make sacrifices. It's going to be a tough road, just like it is for everybody else starting something new. It's not just about. We do it for the lifestyle and all that stuff, but you can't just think it's going to be easy. You're going to make sacrifices going this way.
Yeah, absolutely. And I did see a couple hands real quick. I just want to mention we'll definitely have about 15 minutes at the end of the presentation for questions. I want to keep the flow going here. So
I just want to jump in
Please.
real quick on that. And you're right. Entrepreneurs make tremendous sacrifices in every industry. And the problem with that, though, is, it's different in different places. In the Twin Cities, Minneapolis and St. Paul, there is infinitely more demand for sustainably raised produce and meat than will ever be met. We have a beef farm, and we've never met the demand from our customers. We're constantly looking for more animals and constantly looking for more processing space. There's a tremendous amount of backlog in our system where we're at. I don't think in our lifetime, my wife and I will fulfill the demand for our product. So the problem is that entrepreneurs are willing to make those sacrifices. We made the sacrifice, but those who follow us, who don't have that entrepreneurial spirit, they want to see it more as a career with some maybe a little bit more security, a little bit more defined income and work level, and that's the challenge. We got to get agriculture and get the business of agriculture to the point where it looks a little bit more like a regular job for some people, if we're going to have enough farmers join in and meet the demand, at least from our perspective.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I think one comment that should be made is that the world would tell us that there's a supply and demand curve for farming, for agricultural talent, just like anything else. And things kind of tend to follow the money. So I do think that what we need is a few successful entrepreneurs to come in and not make trillions of dollars, but to do well, to be able to support a family and to be public about that. And that will obviously attract more people into the industry. But on that note, what are the challenges that new farmers are running into? We already mentioned funding, but what are some more practical stuff? David, I want to start that one with you, because I know that you've been on the ground as a startup farmer and done the whole thing. So what are some of the top things that come to your mind?
As an urban farmer, the first barrier to entry is land, especially in Los Angeles, especially in West LA, where I'm from and started our operation. But it turns out that there's a lot of solutions to that. Like just recently, the state passed this measure that allows, it incentivizes vacant landowners to host farms on their properties for 5 years and tax that property at something comparable to Central Valley, California. So basically, you don't pay property taxes anymore. So if you can have a vacant lot, save some money over time, and so there's incentivizing people to make land available to farmers. Other opportunities that came up as a solution to that is schools. Like besides the city of LA, the second biggest landowner in LA is the school district, and they have about 5,000 acres of asphalt where there is no tennis court without a net, or, places that are used basically during earthquake drills. And if you think about that volume of land and the high productivity of the systems that we use, we can put a major dent into feeding the city using just those types of lands. So part of my excuse to why I want to train, put farms in schools is sort of like the carrot. Yes, there's this educational component, but the bigger picture beyond training the future farmers is that the schools could ultimately be the future farms themselves. So.
Yeah, that's awesome stuff, and I'll keep picking on UCLA because I go here, but I happen to know that they're working on a program here to, they're spending all this money on irrigation. You've got all these green fields, and they're growing flowers and sort of stuff that looks pretty, but why couldn't they be growing food here on campus? And I think that's something that they're definitely moving the direction towards. For you guys at Archie's Acres, you launched farmers out all the time. So what do you see as some of the things that they're running into within those first year or two?
Yeah, like you said, funding's always an issue. Regulation in terms of zoning, permitting for a greenhouse, particularly in counties like San Diego, is, it's like permitting to build a mansion on the coastline. It's gotten really ridiculous. And then, talked about this earlier, but the Food Modernization Act is really a hindrance for small-scale growers and be very difficult for organic growers particularly, and small-scale growers to comply with. It's going to be expensive. And it doesn't favor organic growers in any way.
So we say, don't get mad, get involved. Be active, read about it. And I can tell you for funding, we've aligned ourselves with the Farm Service Agency. We worked with Whole Foods and their local producer loans. And so we've been able to answer a lot of those issues, matching our students up with the resources that are there. But we really need the people to support those local farms. It's building the base and holding that base and having more stores bring in local food, no matter where they are.
Yeah, definitely. How about this issue? How about, I started farming back in April 2012, and we've been lucky to raise some money via crowdfunding, and we found a great land lease and stuff like that. But the issue that we found is basic farming skills. I grew up in the city. I didn't really have background in this stuff. You can read as many books as you want, but until you've actually done it, you don't really know what you're doing. So could either of you two guys, I think, talk on that?
Yeah, in agriculture, I'm talking about growing fruits and vegetables. I've lost more money than I care to even mention because I've missed plant dates by a week. And this is very serious stuff. Each region, you're taking this amazing seed and it's going to do these incredible things, but you have to put it precisely in this environment to succeed and do very well. You plant tomatoes too late, they're not going to be a good crop. You plant them too early, they're going to get killed by frost. I'm just talking about tomatoes. How you see a situation in a field, how you react to that, especially in organic agriculture. You have, 1 day to make the right decision. And like I mentioned when I was talking, I chatted with a farmer friend of mine. He's a very large grower, and he's telling me, he's like, in this business, it takes 5 years of being out there every day just to get to a point where you can claim that you kind of know what's going on. Right? And year 5. So you're like looking back at, I keep journals of all the stupid mistakes I've made, and I always tell my wife, oh, I'm tired of learning these lessons. It's getting so tiring. But that's the reality of farming, and there's no, and really, that's a knowledge that exists, and universities should make that available to people in practice. And I think Cal Poly is very good with the learn by doing philosophy of being practical. But UC Davis has hundreds, another land grant university has hundreds and hundreds of acres. And, you drive around and I look at this farmland and I'm like, what is going on? They got the shop, they got the tractors, they got the land, they got the water. It's just sitting there. And when you ask them, hey, why don't we grow fruits and vegetables here? There's a political response to it. Or one little farmer complains, you guys are trying to put me out of business, and it stops. And I think there's a real disconnect between the complexity of this information about farming, and we all have it and making it available, and it's being put into the hands of these large businesses who don't really have a benefit in giving it out, right? Like why would a company in Salina say, hey guys, you're getting into farming, that's cool. Here's my 10-year historic days to harvest information. Here's how much it costs. Here's what you can expect to yield. And by the way, this is how to grow it. Like there's no benefit for them to do that, but we need to get that information out. And even with that information, there's still a tough row to hoe.
I would just add, Sustainable Farming Association is a nonprofit that has 9 regional chapters throughout Minnesota, and we're expanding into our neighboring states and throughout the Midwest. And through that network, it's a farmer-to-farmer network, we facilitate that exchange of information. The University Extension Service in the land grant system is not going to do that. They're funded, as a former employee from that system, they're funded by the Dow AgriSciences, the Pioneers, the DuPonts, the Monsantos, and they're not going to, in my view, offer that venue for exchange of information. So we're looking to other ways to do it, and we're building a farmer-to-farmer network. We have one that helps to facilitate that, mentoring, bringing farmers that are starting and putting them in touch with someone with experience. Another thing that we're doing, we have, to my knowledge, the only study in the country right now being conducted on farms that are 3, 5, 10 years in existence. We're surveying producers. We're looking for farmers to take the survey, and we'll pay you to take it. See me afterwards. But we're looking for information from farmers who have started farming and have had to kind of face the music at some point. Either they've exited farming altogether, or they've made a change. Thad's a good example. Maybe we should talk, and you can take the survey, because you made a change. You decided to do this farm fresh to you, and that's what really shifted gears for your whole operation and launched all kinds of new opportunities and new streams of income, new profitability. So that's a great example. So we're trying to collect that information. So we've got some initial results. We'll be publishing the full report in 2014. But what we're finding from our initial results on this is that about 80% of the people we've surveyed have said they started farming to provide a full-time income. And currently, of those surveyed, only 20% are actually getting a full-time income from that. So profitability is probably the number one thing that people are struggling with. Number two would be those who want to get into debt in our area are having a hard time finding, present company notwithstanding. Our local farm services agency folks don't understand sustainable agriculture. So they understand corn, soybeans. They understand, big equipment, large buildings, big grain bins, chemical application equipment. That's what they understand. They don't understand smaller scale, you want to spend money on a greenhouse? I'm not sure exactly how that's going to affect your bottom line. So our local folks struggle making that connection. So we have people who would like to borrow money but can't, and then we have folks that maybe have borrowed too much money, and debt is an issue for them. So our top things that we deal with our constituents are access to land and funding, debt, and then the other thing that's in profitability, and then the other thing is relational issues. Farming is stressful. Farming is fatiguing. It puts stress on families, and sometimes people get into it, and maybe one person in the couple or one person in the family is driving that, and everybody's on board initially, and then maybe 2 or 3 years in, or the other person is like, I didn't know it was going to be like this. I don't like this anymore. I want to change. And oftentimes the farm becomes on the chopping block. Either the farm goes or the partnership falls apart. And neither one of those is really a good outcome. So those are some of the things that we're facing and trying to affect change in.
Yeah.
I just want to say that we teach the Veteran Sustainable Ag Training, and we have a 6-week full impact course where we go from seed to market, but we also teach how to construct a business plan and how to really navigate how you're going to make a living. And we've had issues across the country with different farm service agency representatives, and what you do is you don't get mad, you get involved. We were able to connect them with other agents that would explain to them the process, and we've been able to navigate through that. You can't give up. You got to stay with it. And we have several of we've had over 200 students. We probably have 65 farms that are working now. We do consider it a full-time living, and we've had really good fortune with our growers staying up with it. And they grow in South Carolina, where they have their weather dictates their season, but growing hydroponically and growing organic hydroponic, it really gives them a longer season, and then they prepare for those winter months. And when they're not growing, they're selling soaps and lotions and all types of things that they make from their product on those downtimes. And they've been able to make it, and we're really proud of that. But the other thing is our website, we have for our students, they become part of the VSAT alumni, and that connects them with each other. And when they have an issue, they have that connection back to both us, Colin and I, but all the graduates, and they can work out those issues that they're going through, because really what farmers need is support. And the support that comes from the outside makes a huge difference for that couple that might be going through stress. And it is really important for both the husband and wife to be on board, but it's really possible, and it's a great living for your kids.
And just to add to that support, you made a great point of the universities aren't so much geared towards supporting small-scale growers and, in a sustainable agriculture as a whole. We have a great, the UC Ag Extension, land-grant university throughout the United States, and it works well if you're in canning tomatoes in California or if you're in the commodity business in the Midwest. But if you're growing herbs and greenhouses in, San Diego, there's not a lot of support in that area.
Well, and I want to also add too that in Minnesota, University of Minnesota, if they're listening, is very supportive of sustainable agriculture. We kind of see ourselves as a little island there in Minnesota, right? So we got the real progressive things going on the West Coast. We got real progressive things going on the East Coast relation to agriculture. All this space in the middle where it's just cowboy boots and belt buckles, and then we got Minnesota, and it's this really progressive, very environmentally minded group of folks, and Minnesota or Minneapolis, St. Paul is a very metropolitan area, very very trendy, and so we have this huge demand, this island of demand in the sea of commodity crops, basically, and the University of Minnesota is very supportive, but in relation to the support given to commodity agriculture, it's a drop in the bucket. So I sit on the board of, or on the advisory council for the Minnesota Institute for Sustainable Agriculture, which is a partnership between the University of Minnesota, the Ag Extension folks, and a half dozen or so nonprofit organizations. That's a community-based organization that's to help promote sustainable agriculture and to drive change at the university. So we're tasked with that whole environment. And their budget from the University of Minnesota is $190,000. And so the little teeny nonprofit that we run is $300,000. So we're going to them for help. We're going to them for support on these things. And they're smaller than we are. So we need to collectively stand at land-grant universities and say, no more token support. No more 190,000 when you're over here and you've got millions of dollars of land devoted to research and scores of staff and funding in the millions of dollars. No more of that. We need a 10-fold increase in funding. That's just the beginning for land-grant universities to support sustainable agriculture. We need land grants to be offering not only degrees, bachelor's degrees in sustainable agriculture, but we need graduate level degrees in sustainable agriculture. We need to build the infrastructure, the system that's equal to in power and in scope to the industrial model.
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to let you guys know we have about 8 minutes left until we're going to open up Q&A, so please be thinking of those questions. I want to tell a quick story real quick because we're talking about this university stuff and how everything's going to change that way. So when we had our first batch of chickens, pasture-raised chickens ready for processing, which is making them into chicken dinners basically, we had never done this before. So we walked out to the pasture and we had an uh-oh moment when we realized we have no idea how to do this. We didn't have anybody to call, we didn't have anybody to talk to, but what we did have was the glorious YouTube. So we pulled up YouTube and we were able to figure it out. So I think yes, there's absolutely a need for high-level education for all this stuff, but for somebody who's willing to go the distance, who's willing to do the research on their own, you could find out how to do just about anything if you're creative enough. So I want to move into the next question, and we can float this by anybody, but the last thing that we want is this huge new influx of farmers all going into factory farm or running CAFO productions or something like that. So how do we encourage people not just to get into agriculture, but to get into sustainable practices? How do we get them to go into that direction specifically?
You have to attach the individual, like when I had these, when we do our farm academy, and at the end of the class, after they've been told that no one's going to lend them money, I tell them, what you don't understand is that you don't want to go into that business. You're going to get beat. Like I'm getting beat in that business. And what we need to realize is that these individuals, that's the brand. And the problem with the current agriculture model is that those behaviors that we don't want are not connected to the consumer. So the consumer can't hold an individual accountable. My farm like my name's everywhere. If something goes down, I'm going to hear about it and feel bad, and my brother's going to get mad at me, and my wife's going to get mad at me, the kids are going to know about it. It's going to be, something that I don't want. And that's the value that our organization brings to the food supply, is that we're doing things differently and we're representing them that way, and we're putting our personal face and signature on it. And new farmers need to realize that when they come into the business, if they think that they're going to compete against Cal Organic or these large companies, they're not. They're going to get beat at that game. They need to play the game of, I'm going to go in, like these food trucks. I'm going to go in. People like me. I'm a brand. I'm adding value. We saw that, a little bit of money at the top line magnifies through the food system, so it's real money at the production level because they're not having to pay for all these middle steps. And that's the solution and the approach. And the other thing to realize is, I tell people, your strength isn't in actually growing things, like as an example, but you really like showing this to people. Like perhaps you need to consider an agritourism model. Like that does the same thing. Like think outside the box. All of the value for these new small growers that are going to succeed are in that individual person. And as soon as you start empowering and the system starts rewarding these individuals who want to do things different and better and be transparent about the process, and other people like consumers who care, they're never going to go into suddenly, they're not going to sell out one day and go down the road that we don't want.
I have a different twist on that. And it's kind of interesting, aquaponics being such a new thing, that every commercial venture in the US has some coupling revenue stream in there because they haven't made it work financially just by selling produce. I look at that as a failed business model. And if a farmer has to come up with a way to make money beyond selling food, there's definitely nothing wrong with diversification, but it definitely says there's something wrong with our system. And so for me, what's wrong with our system is how we operate, where we have, we used to have a lot more, but even today when we have almost no farmers left, we still have a lot of people competing to sell food to us. And the solution to that, to me, is something that's been proven for hundreds of years. It's called a cooperative. And so we're actually launching something specifically to address that issue called the Urban Farm Alliance. There are other cities that have already done it. There's one in Baltimore. I think they're doing pretty well so far. The Urban Farm Alliance is positioned to do exactly what help farmers in a certain way. It's this type of support group in a way. It allows them to do what they should be doing, which is growing food. You got into farming not to open up a Twitter account. You got into farmer because you like soil or you like new innovative methods. And the Alliance is there to do similar to what it's a direct-to-consumer model that allows, centralized distribution. And I know it sounds crazy. Now you're talking about centralization. Now you're talking about, now you're building a new Walmart. But it's because it's done on such a local level, on such a smaller level than, just on a city level, which sounds even, it's something that for me is, it's having spent most of my time in the beginning only dividing my time equally between economics and the technical side of how we grow food. It was the only solution I could come up with. Everything else will just sort of kind of be like duct tape and dental floss, keeping this thing together. But again, if we work cooperatively, I look at it as the only sustainable business model available to us. So.
The one thing I would add is that the industrial model is a failed, dying system. With climate change on its way, in some places you might argue that it's not coming, like in where we are. We just had snow on the ground, but I think that's part of climate change. It is a failed model. Why should people get into sustainable agriculture? Because it's the only brand of agriculture that's going to survive in the future. It's the only, there won't be another model in place. And so it's time to learn these alternatives now so that when it gets much worse, we'll have those in place. What's happening in Minnesota right now is irrigation systems are going up everywhere. So farmers are selling, or last year they sold their corn at $7 a bushel. They got flushed with cash, so they don't want to pay taxes. So they put in an irrigation system because they didn't get any rain. And so that's just a Band-Aid. That's just duct tape, put it in an irrigation system. Totally changing the way you produce to build soil health rather than maximize yield. That's sustainable agriculture. That's something that can withstand what comes down the road.
Yeah, that's a great point. We have just a couple minutes left until questions. I'll direct you guys to two mics on both sides of the room here. If you have a question, I invite you to start stepping up to the mic, and then we'll try to get to you. Another thing I can try to do is if you want to tweet questions, since we are in LA, and this is supposed to be some kind of future thing. If you want to try to tweet questions, hashtag Seedstock 2013. I can try to get to a couple of those. I can't promise that I'll get to all of them, but if you have a question that you for sure want answered, go ahead and get either one of the mics. One last quick question. The future, speaking of the future, are we looking at more of a large-scale thing where we've got a few select individuals running bigger sustainable operations, or more of a decentralized thing, or a combination of both? Just a quick one for anybody that wants to pick in.
I would say a combination of both. The demand on American agricultural products globally is not going away, it's growing. And so the only people who can really fill that demand are large-scale growers. But locally, nobody cares about where their flowers are grown. That's why flower production in San Diego is moving south of the border. But people care about where their food is grown, and that's why greenhouse production of herbs and leafy greens is growing in San Diego. And so I think it's going to be a combination of both, because people are concerned about where their food comes from. They like the story of the farmer and so forth. We're not going to be able to fill that global demand, but big-scale growers will. So that's my opinion on that.
Awesome.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Like we spend a lot of time focusing on this very specific type of food system, but the reality is too much of anything is a bad thing. And I think where we are in the pendulum of modern agriculture is it's swung pretty far in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and we're starting to see it. We're trying to adjust, and there's always going to be a home for, or a demand for, just being able to make cheap grain, cheap rice, those things. But we can't say, well, that's going to take care of everyone, because clearly when you look at the health of the United States and the obesity and diabetes issues, you have to factor that in as the true cost of food. So who's really paying for that? Like, if we have subsidized cheap food and all of these other problems, is that food really as cheap as we think it is? Like, clearly not. And so we need to make sure that we're looking at the whole thing and putting the pieces together.
Awesome. Good
I
stuff.
quickly want to say, I just really like the reemergence of the family farm across America. I mean, I think that's going to make a really big impact, and the big farms are there, but let's have more people do those small-scale farms that are actually serving their communities.
And not forget, it's a $3 trillion industry, the food and fiber. There's a lot of money to be made. It's all kind of centralized at this point, but that can definitely spread out to a lot more people.
Good. I'd like to start opening it up for questions. Gentleman in the side here, please.
Hi, my name is Mike Nadell. I'm founder of Danson Seed Company. We're a vegetable seed company. We breed and develop application-specific types of products for a variety of different species. Question I want to address to the panel relates to farm labor and the issues around farm labor that you encounter. Because as we look towards the future, as a company producing genetics for the future, we're really trying to find solutions that minimize hand labor and optimize mechanical harvest solutions to reduce the amount of labor on the farms. So I'd really like to hear a little bit more about farm labor issues that you folks face.
Well, I don't have employees, so this one's for you guys.
So
I could just say that from the survey that we've been conducting with farmers, labor's showing up as an issue. Access to labor at a reasonable cost is an issue. Many startup farms have employed interns, but as you were speaking about the regulations, certainly there's some labor laws that bring some of that practice into question. Labor is an issue that is going to have to be dealt with, and it's showing up as one of the concerns from our members.
So for the first time in my farming career, I've seen the cost of actually the supply and demand for labor exceed minimum wage. So until last year, I could reasonably count on if I needed 20 people, that I could find 20 people at a minimum wage rate. And for the first time this year, across the industry, the harvest crews are being paid well above minimum wage as a base, just because there's such a shortage of labor. And I think what that does is it's forcing farms to have better jobs for people. And so it's not that, like when you consider what we're asking temporary labor to do. It's quite ridiculous. We're saying, hey, we want an unlimited number of folks to show up and prune my peaches for 2 weeks, and then we want you to disappear until harvest season time, and then we want you to come back and pick them, and then we want you to disappear. Like, that's literally what the industry's asking for. And there's two solutions. Solution one is you have a seasonable or a year-round supply. And so not only are you able to bring in a person, but you can say, hey, I have work for you year-round. And this is really important because now you and your family have some security. It's highly beneficial for the local community. I have a group of customers who are willing to commit to that style of farm. That's one way to solve it. The other way to solve it is when you talk to like the best farmers and harvesters, like the best in the world in Salinas, their guys are getting paid $13 to $15 an hour at a piece rate establishment. And so what this is going to do is it's another pressure that's going to push other farms out of the business.
From an urban farmer's perspective, in an industry called fledgling industry called aquaponics, and as the smallest fish on this panel, it's but with maybe the grandest vision about how we can actually grow the most amount of food possible in urban landscapes. It really begs the question: how am I going to find people to support this industry when there's really the number of people I could hire today is near zero? There's like a couple of people in this room I know who actually know something about aquaponics, but nationally that number is really small. And so actually, literally teaching, in some ways, it's like a double-edged sword. I mean, in one way, I'm trying to. A lot of what I teach is open source, so I'm training my future competitors. But it's also, the long end game is to actually train my future employees, because the reality is that if there's just physically not enough people in the world today who are hireable.
I would say we can learn a lot from the Dutch in that instance. They've, hiring laws, labor laws in the Netherlands is a lot different than here in the United States, and so they automate. I think that's one route, but I also think we live in an interesting paradigm in the United States where we say we want farm workers to make living wages and to live better, yet we want cheap food. Well, that means if a farmer is not making enough to pay his employees we're undervaluing our food. We're not really paying for what it's worth, and I think the market's going to correct that soon. Something clearly has to be done about labor laws because and immigration reform is a key part of that. Because in San Diego, obviously you think being so close to the border that migrant labor would be easy to get a hold of, but that has changed drastically. And the days of cheap labor is over. You're not going to be able to find somebody to work on your farm for $7.50 or $8 an hour. You're going to be paying them into the teens minimum.
Awesome. I want to make sure that we get through a couple more questions, so I'm going to cut it off here before we go on. I'm going to go here next because I think you're next in line, please.
Okay. Hi, my name is Mike Roberts. I'm an organic farmer. I work with McGrath family. Y'all came out there, or some of you came out there yesterday to visit us. And I almost fell out of my chair when David, I believe he said about 1 to 4 million per yield, gross yield per acre in urban farming setting. Was that right?
That's right.
And I wanted to hear a little bit more
How's
about
that possible? Well,
we're a long way from that, for
obviously
sure.
that we're talking about in a greenhouse.
Of course.
So the numbers are not, whether it's hydroponic or aquaponic, you can grow so much food per square foot, and you can just have many more cycles per year. So it's comparing to in-ground without a greenhouse. So if that's what we're comparing, traditional row crop without a greenhouse and aquaponic or hydroponically grown produce in a greenhouse.
Okay, and are there case studies or places where I can find out more of people who are doing that? And I mean, is that documented?
Howlings says it's 30 to 1.
So there's an example. Howlings is like the largest indoor tomato production facility or anywhere around here, that's for sure.
There are neighbors.
Yeah, okay.
Very different growing styles for sure.
It's just when you look, when you think about what a plant needs to grow, it's many things, but specifically as far as controlling its heat, water, temperature, CO2, humidity, those things are wildly out of control on the planet. And so everywhere where you think you know where food was growing, even on the best case scenario where Oxnard is where we grow strawberries, those things are absolutely changing. Like in 50 years, you won't grow strawberries in Oxnard. So I tell people my get rich quick scheme is putting this bumper sticker out in the world that says the only way to control climate change is to build greenhouses, and that is the absolute truth. The only way to, and so that's one thing. How do you mitigate any of these threats that we're dealing with? But once you're in there, it's like a tremendous opportunity to grow enormous amounts of food, and also, year-round produce around the corner.
I was just going to add, I believe in what David is saying. I mean, I think our farm it's not an acre yet, but if we show our projections to scale to an acre, it would say the same thing, which we hope to do here pretty soon. But it also means not being a price taker, being a price maker. Going back to commodities, commodity traders are doing well, brokers are doing well, farmers aren't, because farmers aren't making the price the commodity traders and the brokers are. So you have to get closer to your customer and tell your story.
You asked for a specific example of this. The first ground-up construction greenhouse that's an acre size took place up in Canada, in Montreal, Lufa Farms, and it's 40,000 square feet. They have a farm fresh to you business model. Their entry level price point is $30 per person, and they have like 2,000 people spending that. So you can do the math very quickly and find out that it's a lot more money per acre generated than anything possible in soil, even if it's the best soil on the planet.
Thanks.
And just last comment on that, I'm a big supporter of greenhouses because that's what we do. But if you look at Alameda, Spain, there's a lot of damage that greenhouses can do too. So we have to, greenhouses are great because we can increase yields and do all this stuff, but it's just like being organic, like Thad said, doesn't necessarily make you sustainable. Being in a greenhouse doesn't necessarily make you sustainable or environmentally sound as well.
Yeah, it's great stuff. Since we've got mostly, well, I guess you're a grass-fed beef producer too, but since we've got mostly veggies here, I'd like to make one quick comment, and it's just a stat. Average land rent or land lease price in California right now is $7 per acre per year. So as far as a meat production or any kind of like a pastured livestock production, that's a pretty doable number right there. $7 per acre per year. Pasture land.
We need to move. We need to move.
I think you should be careful. That probably takes all of the land, including mountains and hills, and divides it by rent. Like when you're talking farmland, cheap farmland is $150 an acre. That's cheap land rent for flat ground.
Yeah, it definitely takes everything into
Yes,
account.
that's the state divided by the rent.
Yeah. Sir.
Hi, my name is Keith Kwan. I'm actually a UCLA Anderson graduate too, so always love Seedstock. So something that a concern of mine is we actually grow almonds, and we are more commercial or conventional based in the Central California area. Is that there's not so much of an us and them mentality, but there's definitely that we are the forefront. We're learning a lot, and we're doing all these sort of breakthrough technologies activities. There's a concern that in the conventional space, there's water problems, people are drilling wells, there's worries about too much pesticides, not sustainability, but is there a concern that having sort of the mentality that there's sustainable growth and organic growth, and there's everyone else, the industrial side, that is alienating a lot of people, like a lot of smaller growers that are interested in learning about different ways of water management, different ways of trying to find better resources behind drilling more wells or just leasing fallow land to import the water rights. What are your techniques or your thoughts on how to outreach to reach those people who are interested in learning and finding different alternatives, just pouring money into wells or buying water off someone else? I mean, what are your strategies or thoughts on how to reach those kinds of growers? Well, my concern is something like Seedstock is great if you're someone like me who went to Anderson and went to Seedstock. But for a lot of those growers, they're not really aware of those kinds of resources or ideas. So how do you go? You have to go out and find them and reach them. And what are your thoughts on?
I love the idea of just having an entrepreneur, for example, who can launch a successful enterprise using a different method and eliminate the water issue altogether because they're so water efficient. So I mean, it's kind of a difficult question to answer, but I feel like we need a series of successes in our industry, regardless of how we're doing it, to make it attractive, and so people will be lured to success.
We need to change the paradigm of what a successful farmer looks like, and the picture needs to be cultivated through conferences like this, through the media, through everything, that a successful farmer builds health into the soil. That's what a successful farmer does, whatever crop they're growing, whatever animal they have. Real quick, August 20th, I stood in a field in Bismarck, North Dakota. That's way, way north, okay? August 20th, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 100 degrees. That's climate change. The crop growing was a 30 crop mixture of cover crops that was about shoulder height to me, that had been in the ground for 7 weeks. It had had a total of a ½ inch of rain on it. So I wish I had a picture to show you. I have a picture. If you want to see it, come see me. This farmer has been building the soil on his farm for 15 years using a mixture of cover crops, row crops, and livestock grazing. So his soil is able to put out an actively growing crop at 100 degrees in the middle of August with a ½ inch of rain on it between planting time and the day we were there. And the cattle went out there and were grazing. We're gaining weight at 100 degrees, not sitting in the shade swatting flies. This farmer is building his soil health, and that's what's going to withstand the impacts of changing climate, with the impacts of changing demand for food that we're producing.
Awesome.
I'm sorry?
It's gonna cool the planet.
Well, I don't think 100 degrees in Bismarck was cool.
Everybody's gotta do it.
I should have given you guys better warning. We have like less than 1 minute left, but I'd like to at least get one answer to your question if we can.
Well, I don't have a question. I'm Guru Mantra Khalsa, and I publish Nutrition News, and I just want to say that your idea of cutting out the middleman, going direct to your market, is the way to do this. And from my perspective as a publisher, telling your stories and keeping the knowledge circulating is the fastest, shortest way to that market that we have, because everyone wants success, and we're real tired of cynicism and resignation. And you guys aren't sugarcoating anything, but what you're doing is demonstrating that who you're being is your values. What you're doing is farming, and that's a real serious distinction to share, and I want to commend all of you for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I couldn't think of a much better close than that. Thank you. And I think most of the panelists will be around during the networking coffee break that's coming up right now if you guys want to try to connect with any of them. So thank you guys very much, and thank you.